Welcome to Advanced Techniques Using Excel, demonstration number 1, converting data in multiple columns to a single column. In the example that I have here, we see an array of data in cells C3 to F7. For convenience, I've put the data in the following format. The rows all share the same first digit, and the columns all share the same last 2 digits. If I wanted to convert this data into a long array, for example, in a vertical column, and I didn't care about the order, then the most straightforward function to use in Excel is the small function, in which case I would say small, open paren, I would select the array. I'd want to toggle it so the array is an absolute reference, not a relative reference, comma, and then I would enter the second argument to indicate which of the smallest of the numbers I want. I've already typed in the values 1 through 20, so I'll go ahead and select that information in cell H3, which has the number 1, and this gives me the smallest value in the array, which is 10,022. If I now copy this down, I have the values in array. If I were to copy the vertical array to a cell longer than is actually available, it would actually indicate an error, in this case the num error. So for example, this is trying to get the 21st smallest number in a data set that actually only has 20 values. Now, one of the things to note is that this is perfectly fine if the order of your data does not matter. So if the order of the rows or the columns is not important, then this method works perfectly fine. Now, one of the things I'm going to take advantage of, though, is I'm going to change the way I've counted from 1 to 20. So for example, what I'm going to do is change this array, so instead of the numbers being typed out, which is possible to do this in a number of ways. For example, if you type 1, 2, 3, highlight those, and do a drag, Excel's smart enough to know to continue the values to 20. That's perfectly fine. Alternatively, I could have said 1. In the next cell, I could say equals, go to the cell above, add 1 to that, copy that down. That also gives me the values 1 to 20. But in this case, I actually want to take advantage of the row function. So I'm going to say equals row, and from this I'm going to subtract the row of the very first cell at the top of the list. In this case, the cell H3. Again, I'm going to toggle this so it's an absolute reference. And when I do this, this will give me the value 0. So to this, I actually want to add the value 1. And when I copy this all the way down, this again gives the list from 1 to 20. Now, common trick. So if I were to look in this cell, I see it's referencing the array which I want and information in cell H3. I can see H3 has a consistent function as the rest of the column. I'm going to copy that information, put that into here. I'll actually replace H3. My function looks noticeably more complicated, but I can copy this down, and by doing this, it actually doesn't matter if I have the data in column H any longer. For example, I can blank that out, and it still remains the same. Now, what I want to demonstrate next is how to get the information from the array where I actually maintain the order of the columns. So for example, I want the first column, and immediately following the first column, I want the information from the second column. To do this, I'm going to use the index function. The index function asks for the array of interest, which again, I'll toggle so that it's an absolute reference. It then asks for the row number and then the column number. For example, the information in the 4th row and the 2nd column should be the value 70,044, which indeed we see it is. Now, to make this work, first of all, obtain the information for each of the rows and each of the columns. Well, I've already created a function that lists the numbers from 1 to 20. To do this list, what I need to do is first of all figure out how many rows I have in my data set. So the number of rows, I can simply use count for the data set. Again, to be safe, I prefer to toggle this information since it appears that my array would be in a fixed position. Likewise, the number of columns equals count. I'll highlight the first row to get the number of columns, toggle that. And then I can just use the count function for the entire array to get how many values are in the entire array. So as you can see, I have 5 rows, 4 columns, and a total of 20 values. So I'll use the mod function. So I'll select the list of numbers from 1 to 20, in this case, starting with the value h3. The divisor, in this case, happens to be the number of rows. And again, I want that as a fixed reference. And I can copy that down. And I see that it goes from the cycle 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it resets at 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, and resets at 0. Well, this would work much better for me if I were actually starting at 0 instead of starting at 1. So I'm going to come back to the value in H3. I'm going to subtract the value in H3, and I'm going to copy that value down, and I notice it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. My next change to this function is to add 1, and now I can see that I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Now this, as it stands, would give me the rows that I'm interested in. If I'm copying the second column directly below the first column, I would be copying rows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the second column directly below. The next function I'm going to use is the ceiling function. I'll take my number from my list from 1 to 20, and I'm going to divide that by the number of rows. Again, I will toggle that so it's an absolute reference. The significance, I want it to round up to the nearest whole number. And if I copy this down, I see that I get the values 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, etc. So this is now asking for the fourth row, first column, or the second row, fourth column. Now I can use my index function, equals index. I'll highlight the array from cells C3 to F7, toggle it so it remains fixed. I want it to now look in the row 1, comma, column 1, and I've chosen the values in columns I and J, so when I copy this function down, it will update appropriately. Now again, my preference is to work this backwards and have only one function instead of a set of columns. So I'm going to first go to the final result, highlight the information there, and I will paste it here in cell I3. And if I access the function, I see that it's drawing information from cell M3. So my first step is to go to cell M3. Everything from the equal sign I'll highlight. I'll copy that, and I'll paste that here over M3. Opening the function again, I see that it's highlighting cell L3. Once again, I'll go to L3, highlighting everything from the equals. I'll copy that, escape that cell, and where I see the L3, I will paste that information. I'm going to make this cell a bit larger. When I access this cell, I see that it's referencing information in cell K3 now. So I will come to K3, highlight that information, escape from that cell, and everywhere I see K3 in this function, I will replace it. And here's one case I'll have to be careful because it's dividing. I'll have to put this in parentheses. And now if I copy this down, I see that I have one function that is converting the data, which is currently in 4 columns, into a set of 1 column, where each column has been stacked on the other, on top of the other. Now, if by chance you actually want this function to go in the other direction, so for example, if you wish to take the first row, convert it to a column, and then stack beneath that the second row converted to a column, etc. The only thing that I actually need to do here is switch the order of my rows and my columns. Now again, in this format it looks a little messy, so what I'll do is I'll copy everything in this cell. I'll copy it into column J, row 3. And what I want to do is I want to take everything from everything relating to the mod plus 1, which is indicating now the row. I want to move this so it becomes the column. Now when I've copied this information over, it looks to be there's a problem because it indicated a ref. Well, that's because this information, the first function, was relying on the number of rows. If I'm going by the columns, I actually have to rely on the information in the number of columns. So highlighting this, I see that every time I reference B9, I should actually be referencing B10. So I'm going to come in here and change that to B10. And if I copy this function, I notice I've obtained the result I want. In particular, now my data is stacked by the information from row to row to row to row instead of stacked columns. Thank you. Goodbye.